Hi, I'm Ashley Hammond.
And I'm Locke Hammond.
We're married.
We run a business together.
And we homeschool our 4 kids.
That makes us sound a little crazy.
I think people might think we're a little crazy.
Well, through all that crazy, we're here to help you blaze your own trail through a world designed for conformity.
And break the chains holding you back from living an uncommon life.
This is Trailblazers and Chainbreakers.
Hi, friends.
Hello. We're back.
What's up?
What's up? We're back for part 2. Back for more. So this is part 2 of our story. We did part 1.
Yes, we did.
The fairy tale love story.
Yep.
I might be a little biased,
The Disney movie.
I want to be Moana.
I am Moana.
Nice. Nice. We just lost all of our listeners.
Yep, they're gone.
All right. Great start, as usual. So part 1 was, I'm a little biased, but kind of a fairy tale love story. This is part 2, where reality strikes back, I guess. We'll share a little bit more of real life kind of things in our relationship, I guess. And I think that I want to start this off with a quote that we have printed out like a plaque hanging above our bed. And it says, "A perfect marriage is just 2 imperfect people who refuse to give up on each other." And that quote is really meaningful to me. And it kind of leads us into why I think it's important to you and I to do this episode. I think you and I both, neither of us want to put out a perfect image, like we're perfect or our relationship is perfect or we know everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
We don't want to come across that way, and we'll talk about what we think and what we've learned, and we'll give advice, obviously. But I don't ever, and I know you don't ever want anyone listening or watching or talking to us to think that we're perfect. We don't want to be a couple talking about relationships in this case, in this episode, but we talk about other things, whether it's relationships or self-development, growth, money,
Kids.
mindset, kids, whatever we're talking about. We don't want to give the impression that we're perfect. And so it's important for us to do this as kind of like a reality check, kind of like oil and vinegar, to kind of go with the first episode, which was, high head in the clouds love story. So this is a little bit more, it's not horrible at all, but a little bit more realistic. Some of the not so fairy tale details. So in the beginning, you want to start in the beginning. It's always a good place to start. You wanted to start us off with something in the beginning.
In the beginning, we both came with our own baggage. My baggage, our upbringing was very different, and I know it may not seem like it mattered, but it mattered to me. I came from a very different lifestyle than he came from. He was a little bit more sheltered. I don't want to say I lived like a crazy party life, but there were a lot of things going on within my family and around me that he did not grow up with. And for me, it seemed like normal. It seemed like I thought that was the way that everybody lived. And anybody that lived different kind of lived like in the perfect house with the perfect family with the white picket fence. So when I met him, I was in love with him from the beginning, but a little bit intimidated by his upbringing and his family, and felt like maybe he might be too good for me or better than me. And so that was what I went to. That's what was going through my head and my head trash.
Can I say something about that?
Yeah,
because it actually ties right into how we started. We started, we don't want to give the perception that we're perfect, right? Yeah. And I think that what we'll talk about tonight, as we're going through all this stuff, is that's the perception you had
Yeah.
of me
Yeah.
and my family and my upbringing. And I did have a sheltered childhood, and you said you had a little bit of like a partying streak. I did my fair share of partying, but in terms of when we were kids, like younger kids, I was incredibly sheltered. And so that came back to bite me in the butt when I met you. But as we'll like hash out a little bit more in detail, I had plenty of my own baggage. It was just the perception that you had of me.
Yeah. I wasn't necessarily talking about myself in my partying years. I was talking about my family atmosphere.
Okay.
Was a little bit different than yours. I grew up with cigarettes, alcohol, everything all around me. And that was normal for me. And what I saw and what I heard, and it's just our upbringings were very different.
Yeah.
And I wasn't talking, I had my share of like drugs and alcohol and partying, but that's not what I was talking about. So when I met him, I was coming from a not so great relationship, and I was not so healthy either. Not that there's anything wrong with medication, but I was on quite a few medications. And he didn't know about them. And I felt like I needed to be saved. I needed my Prince Charming, who I fell in love with right away, to come in and save me and take me on his horse and ride off into the sun. And he did that. He did that for me. And I don't know where I'm going.
Okay. Well, I mean, one of the points that I wanted to make, you mentioned, is the story of needing to be saved.
Yes.
It's funny you called me Prince Charming. You don't think I'm funny or charming anymore very often. So it's nice to be reminded of that. But we both came in with stories that we were telling ourselves.
Yeah.
So you talked about the baggage, and I think there's a lot there. We still have our own baggage. We also came in with stories that we were telling, and yours, well, we had more than one, but one of your big ones was you were looking to be rescued. Mm-hmm. And you had made a lot of positive changes in your life. You had taken a lot of huge steps forward and done a lot of personal development and started turning things around in your life before you met me. Mm-hmm. But you were still looking for someone to rescue you. And the story I was telling was I was looking to basically go rescue you, mm-hmm. to be a hero is mm-hmm. the way I phrase it now. And I'm not sure that we were aware of these stories at the time. I don't think we weren't.
No.
But our stories and what we were looking for perfectly fit each other.
Yeah.
At the time. But it caused a lot of problems.
Yeah.
And it tied right in with the baggage that we brought. So you mentioned your upbringing and my upbringing. I was, I did some stupid things as a kid, but I was really sheltered. I had never seen abuse. I had never seen drug abuse. Mm-hmm. I had never seen mental illness. And I could go on, but there were a lot of things that I was just naive about or ignorant about the real world. And so when our baggage collided and our stories collided, there were a lot of times where I was very judgmental about a lot of things. And so you mentioned, I was not aware that you were on some medication. When I found out I didn't handle that the best, because I thought, living a sheltered life, that, well, what's wrong with you? Why would you need that? Mm-hmm. Because I had never seen anyone that I was aware of. Doesn't mean people in my life may or may not have been on medication. I don't even know. It was just not talked about.
Yeah.
And so I had never seen it. I didn't know how to handle it, and that's not making excuses. The bottom line is I was not understanding about a lot of things, and I was judgmental. And I think part of everyone wants to feel better than other people. Mm-hmm. And I know that part of me felt that urge. And so, that those two stories fit as well. You came into the relationship feeling like you weren't good enough. I was at a point in my life where I was really, really confident, on the point of like cocky about myself.
Yes.
And that played right into it too. So I was cocky about it. I wasn't understanding. I was a little judgmental. And now that I see the real world, obviously there's nothing wrong with being on medication. And a lot of the things, we don't need to go down a list, thing by thing of situations where I may have been judgmental, but that was a recurring story in our relationship too. And that just made you feel like more like shit. You're scared to tell me something, and you finally get up the courage to tell me this, and I don't take it well.
Yeah.
And, that I think created a lot of tension because of the like polarity, like the opposite. That's the opposite of, this fairy tale love story.
Yeah.
It's like you can almost hear like the glass, like the mirror breaking as you realize, okay, this guy's not perfect.
Yeah. So that was just like a little bit of the baggage that I came with. So before I met him, I was a single mom with a little boy. And I forgot to mention this on that first podcast, but I created a list of the things that I wanted, qualities I wanted in the next man that I was with, even though I had no intentions on finding a man anytime soon. I had no intentions on being in a relationship when I, fell in love with Locke at first sight, literally. But I had created this list of all these qualities I wanted in the next man I was going to be with. And literally everything that was on that list, I would look at this list every night before I went to bed. Everything that was on that list, except for like one thing, which was adventurous, which Locke is not adventurous. He's getting better, but it's not one of his qualities. Everything, he met every single thing that was on that list. And the interesting part about that is I wanted all that, but then when I got all that, I didn't feel like I deserved that. And so us coming from two different lives made me believe, like, it's like there's one part of me that wants this Prince Charming to sweep me off my feet with all of these qualities that I wrote down on a list. And then there's the other part of me that wants to push that away, and every chance I get, leave him because I felt undeserving of being loved, because I felt like he was too good for me. Because like he said, when we met, he was at a point in his, like, he wasn't looking for a relationship. He was very successful in his career. He was like kicking ass, making a good amount of money in his career when I met him. So I was like super attracted to everything about him, and yet scared shitless of that being too much or too good for what I deserved.
Yeah. I mean, so I guess that's a really interesting point. It's almost a double-edged sword. When you make a huge upgrade in your life, you have to deal with the head trash telling you that you don't deserve it. But I think I'm glad you said that about the list of everything that you wanted, not because I'm egotistical and like hearing how perfect I am, but because even with that list, and this is kind of, if I could sum up the message of this episode in one line or so, it would kind of be like this. Even with the fairy tale love story, even with this guy in me checking all the boxes, hitting all of the marks with everything that you want, even with everything seeming perfect, there was a lot of other things that came with it. And there was a lot of hard work, fighting, and stress, even with what seemed, in air quotes, perfect. Yeah. And so any relationship is going to take hard work any relationship is going to take both parties growing, and separately and together. And our relationship, I think, is a perfect example of that. While it seemed perfect in the beginning, you cannot get around the hard work and inevitable bad times. And hopefully the bad times don't last a really, really long time, which we'll talk about some of our bad times. But there's hard work. There's going to be bad times, even when it seems, in air quotes, perfect.
Yeah. And like to mention, we did everything like in a year. All the biggest stressors of, like they say, adulthood, buying a house, having a baby, getting married, we did in 1 year. Not to mention,
what were we thinking?
I would not change our story and the way things happen, but not to mention that I came with all this baggage. You had your own baggage, and we had so much unresolved stuff that we needed to heal. And we just threw a bunch of like chaos in the midst of unresolved stuff that needed to be healed. So
like gasoline on a fire.
Yeah, it's like you have like the new relationship, the butterflies, the, living on cloud nine, and then you throw a bunch of those big stressors, adulthood stressors, and then you got to do the healing too. So it's almost like a perfect storm. And
yeah, that's a good way to put it. There were a lot of fights.
Lots of fights.
You threatened to leave a lot.
Yes.
Partly because that's your pattern, which I think you talked about.
Yeah.
And partly because you knew that was the most hurtful thing to me.
Yeah.
And that's a perfect example. We knew exactly how to hurt each other. We fought dirty.
Very dirty.
And there were a lot of days where, I don't want to say a lot of days, but there were days where we didn't want to be around each other. We didn't talk much.
Yeah.
And I think that's how it had to be for us to get through the baggage that we had. I'm not saying that's how every relationship needs to be. I certainly believe that every relationship is going to have a lot of work. I've said it before, if you are in a long-term relationship and you've never had an argument with someone, you're probably not communicating enough.
Yeah.
But I certainly hope that not everybody has to fight the way we fought.
No.
Because some of those were pretty nasty. And I think we both said things that we will not repeat here because we're not very proud of them.
Yeah.
But for our journey, I think that's how it needed to happen for us.
Yeah.
You said you wouldn't go back and change anything. I agree. As much as some of those fights weren't fun, we needed to feel that pain. We needed to sit in that pain to fix things, to heal things, for me, to realize what some of my baggage was. Because that's another thing. When I came into the relationship, I said I was confident on the point of cocky. Like, I didn't think I had baggage.
Yeah.
Like, I was that ignorant that I thought I didn't have baggage. I needed some fights that we had just to figure out what my baggage was.
Yeah. And then I thought that I was not fixable. I honestly thought that it was so bad that I always hate when people say, this is the way I am, this is the way I'm always going to be. But I honestly, I was working on myself when I met him, but I honestly didn't see myself growing to the point where I am now. And so with that first year came, we got pregnant in our first year. Then we had financial struggles for a good part of time. So we added on to the stress. And then with our first baby came some pretty deep postpartum for me, which led me down the rabbit hole of health issues. And also it led me down a rabbit hole of health issues, but it also introduced me and opened my eyes to a more natural, holistic way of living. And I don't think that I think if those health issues hadn't appeared, I would have never gone down that path. So it introduced me to, naturopath doctors. And then after that, getting rid of chemicals, all chemicals, cleaning chemicals, anything chemical I got rid of, to switching to very healthy food. So we were in that struggle for a while.
The health journey, it's still going on.
Yes.
But the health journey has been a recurring or an ongoing kind of theme in our life. And it, for me, being very strong male personality who likes to fix things, having health issues for you that are hard to pinpoint and address has been really, really hard on me because I can't just fix something. It's made you feel guilty, and it's affected our relationship in a lot of different ways. And I don't want to turn this into in no way is this meant to be like a wine fest where we just complain about everything that's gone wrong for us. But like I said in the beginning, I think it's important to point out that, a lot of things are not as perfect as they appear. Where do you want to go from there? Skip ahead a little bit?
Yeah, I do want to mention though, even while our relationship was really rocky and there was a lot of stress, we were both still, even though our eyes weren't completely open yet, we were still both always doing work. I remember work on ourselves. He's always was reading books. I was reading books. We were always listening to, there was a Success Magazine used to have a CD. I remember he would always be listening to that in his car. I would be too. So we were never not working on ourselves. In some way, somehow, we were both putting in work on ourselves.
And we were like that when we met. And honestly, I think that as great as that was and is, I think that is a double-edged sword in a little bit in itself, because that fed into my, I don't have baggage.
Yeah.
Thought process. We're doing work on ourselves. Even when we're in our relationship, we're starting to hit some rocky patches. We're doing work on ourselves. We early on, we kind of did have a little bit of a know-it-all feeling.
Yes.
And that's why we don't want to be like that now. But I do want to go back to one thing you said, and this is not what this episode is going to be about, but you mentioned having postpartum depression after our first, actually you've had it after all 4 of ours in varying degrees. I'm going to say, from someone who never even knew that was a thing, postpartum is no joke.
No.
Postpartum depression is real. It's scary. I think way more women have it than they think. I can't tell you how many women we have heard stories about, whether it's social media or from friends of a friend type stories, who have had postpartum really bad, sometimes not even knowing it.
Yeah.
I just wanted to put that in there because that's one of those things that being sheltered and having no clue what it was coming in, first of all, entirely blindsided me when that happened with you. I had no freaking clue what to do and how to handle it.
Yeah.
But that's a perfect example of somewhere that I don't necessarily want to say judgmental in that sense, but the sheltered upbringing led me to believe that it wasn't a thing, kind of like, what is that? And so I just wanted to acknowledge that and say, I don't know, any guys that are listening, any girls that haven't experienced it luckily, or just haven't had kids, it's legit. It's not something to yep off.
No.
And so you had postpartum after all 4 kids to varying degrees.
Yeah. So when I was pregnant with our 3rd baby and after I had our 3rd baby, I had postpartum. She was probably the toughest out of all of them.
Both with postpartum and just as a baby, the hardest of the babies.
She wasn't my hardest postpartum. She was just the toughest as a baby.
Yeah,
and
she was a handful.
Just did not want to sleep at all, which you know how that affects all of us if we don't sleep. But it was weird because when I had her and after I had her, I had this like strong desire within my body just screaming, I want more. I'm going to do more. I'm meant for more. And so probably, I think she was like 11 months old. I decided to start coaching with a coach. I wasn't mentally ready to start coaching with the coach that I started with. She led me to a healing coach, which is why I think I coached with her at all. I think I was meant.
What you were meant to learn.
Yeah, I was meant to learn that I needed to, do inner child work, which I think everybody should dive into that. Because once you do inner child work, I said this to Locke the other day, once you do it, it's like almost everything clicks. Parenting clicks, the reason why your children do the things they do click, and that's a whole other podcast. But I really dug deep, and it was so eye-opening. I revealed stuff that I didn't even know had happened to me.
Yeah.
I couldn't even remember, and that needed to be healed in order for me to move forward and in order for us to move forward. Because as much as you think you can just shove shit down and ignore it for the rest of your life, you are batshit crazy, because that stuff always comes back up and bites you in the ass.
Yeah, that's one of those things that it's scary. It seems scary to hypothetically uncover past trauma that you didn't remember. Almost like you're better off not remembering it.
Yeah.
But you have to remember it to heal it, to fix the problems, the wounds, the baggage that it's causing.
Yeah.
Because it's causing baggage.
Mm-hmm.
It's an open wound. You just don't remember why you got it.
Yeah.
So I think I totally get that there. It might be scary to go back to that kind of stuff. I think also for us, it was something that our relationship needed that.
Yeah.
And not for the reason that you might think. So when you uncovered some of this past trauma, childhood trauma, you were really, really scared to tell me. There was a logical fear for a good reason, because we had a past history like we've talked about, where I was not understanding. I was judgmental in a lot of situations. I was not an easy person to tell this kind of thing to.
Yeah.
But it was also, even without that logical piece, which was totally fair, there was an emotional fear where you knew I had grown a lot. And I think you knew, maybe you didn't know, but you felt pretty confident that I was going to handle things much better. But it was still, you were still scared shitless, because it was just so traumatic for you. It was that illogical, emotional child inside you that was like, I can't be lovable if I'm sharing this type of thing. But it was really important for our relationship and for me to have a chance to do it better that time.
Yeah.
To be able to be understanding and receptive and have you tell me some things that, they made me mad, but not mad at you, mad at other people. But our relationship needed that to heal certain wounds. I had created wounds because I wasn't understanding, because I was judgmental and mean about certain things when you told me in the past. I needed an opportunity to, and I'm not saying this to brag, but I know that I stepped up in those situations in a way that I wish I'd stepped up the first time. And I spent years regretting that I didn't step up that way in the first time. And so that was huge for me and our relationship, to be able to be there for you the right way for probably the first time, something that heavy.
Yeah. And I mean, and for me, so this opened up a can of worms for me, because there was just a lot of stuff that I hadn't remembered, and that made a lot of sense once I did remember. But when you bring all this stuff up, it's not like you bring it up and you do this exercise with your, my healing coach. She was a process healing coach. That's what her title was. You don't go back and heal through this stuff and then magically you're like, cool,
Poof.
I'm better. That came a lot more struggles because of what I was bringing up and what I was healing through.
Yeah.
And also, I think a lot of people don't realize this, and I didn't even realize this when I was going through it, but it's like you're shedding old skin. You're shedding stuff that has been there for so long. For me, it was, I don't know how old I was. I was 33, I think, 32, I don't know. So I'm shedding that many years of old skin. And so I'm rediscovering who Ashley is. I'm rediscovering who I want to be. So there was parts of me that didn't think that I wanted to be in our marriage anymore. And I was really confused I'm like, I love this man. I fell in love with this man, but I don't want to be with this man. And what I know now that I didn't know then was it had nothing to do with him. It was, I was becoming a new me, and our communication skills, like we mentioned in the past, were not great. And there was a lot of resentment held towards him for the way he showed up for me in the past. Even though he was showing up really well for me in this situation, I still had resentment, and I still didn't know how to communicate my needs or what I was going through.
Yeah, you talked about recently about how it's actually quite common for people going through, doing this inner child work, this past trauma healing.
Or any coaching.
Well, yeah, big kind of impactful moments or growth, I guess. It's normal for them to feel like, not necessarily for any particular reason, like they need to kind of jettison and get rid of almost all aspects of their life.
Yeah.
And in this specific example, it's not uncommon for somebody going through this to feel, for no good reason, the need to leave a spouse.
Yeah.
And we talked about how that's normal, and what we didn't, like you said, what we didn't know at the time. Well, you didn't know that, and you didn't do a good job of communicating that.
Yeah.
And so it felt like you said you were very resentful about a lot of things, and in some cases with good reason. But this whole idea caused a lot of stress and fights between us because of the resentment, because I still, at the period of my growth, I understood that I had not shown up well in the beginning. I understood that I was showing up very well now, and it was kind of that I was on the cusp of realizing that this logical argument doesn't work, but the logical thought process was, well, I've fixed it and I'm showing up now, so what the hell is wrong?
Yeah, so get it together, Ashley.
Well, not get it together, Ashley, but what are you so mad about?
Yeah.
And so I didn't understand, while I understood fully how I didn't show up well the first time, couple times around, I didn't understand how deep that pain was, but I also didn't understand what you were going through with all of the inner child and the healing and the stuff like that. And neither did you.
Yeah.
And so it was like you were resentful for pain I had caused you in the past, and that other people had caused you in the past, and you were lashing out and withdrawing because that's your pattern. And so, yeah, there was a time where you thought that you didn't want to be in our relationship.
And I do want to mention, just because I feel like this is necessary, if you are doing some kind of coaching or healing work or trying to better yourself, there are certain situations where if you do feel like you want to leave your partner and you've outgrown him, there are some situations where that is valid. And in our situation, we were both growing together, and he was being completely the partner that I needed him to be. It had been my way of doing things is to flee, to run, to give up. And when I was dealing with very emotional trauma, that is where I went, because that's where I had always gone.
Well, it kept you alive.
Yeah,
in a couple
it kept me
situations.
safe, and it kept me alive. It served its purpose when it needed to serve its purpose. So I just wanted to mention that, because if you are on a journey of healing and your partner isn't on that journey with you, you can't push your partner to want to grow and change with you. And sometimes you just got to do the work for a while, and eventually they will, and then eventually you might grow without them. And I want to say that that's normal too. So wherever you're at.
Yeah, and that sounds scary.
Yeah.
Like maybe I don't want to grow, because if I grow and my partner doesn't, then they won't want to be with me, or I won't want to be with them, or whatever it may be. I mean, I can understand that, but at the same time, I'm a big believer in what's meant to be is meant to be. And I think that if you set out on a growth journey and you're meant to be with someone,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to inspire them to do something similar, instead of push them away or make them feel crappy about themselves or resentful. Obviously that may not be cut and dry. There may be moments where, I know there are moments where we weren't exactly the most supporting to each other's growth. I know there were days where, one person is having a great day, made a lot of progress, and the other person is struggling and tries to kind of knock them down a peg or two early on. We had days where it's like, I feel like anytime I'm happy, you're cutting the legs out from underneath me. And anytime you're happy, I'm in a shitty mood. And I mean, we had conversations about that.
Yeah.
But I think that you got to give your partner some slack.
Yeah.
And some benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
But like you said, if it's not going to work out, it's not going to work out. But I think that you might be surprised at how willing your partner is to grow with you once you start.
Yeah.
And I know that, we talked about the stories we were telling ourselves, I want to be the hero story is mine, and you want to be rescued story. And it's funny because we kind of had that fairy tale love story, the stereotypical Disney movie where that happens. Our stories changed. There was a point where you hit and you realized you didn't want me to rescue you anymore.
Mm-hmm.
You wanted to prove that you could handle it yourself. And strangely enough, around the same time, I got sick of the story that I was craving for so long, of needing to be the hero. And I wanted you to save yourself too.
Yeah.
I wanted a break. And you mentioned our communication hasn't always been great, to say the least. It happened about the same time, but we didn't know it.
Yeah.
And so you started to get frustrated with me because you wanted to change the story, and I was getting frustrated with you because I wanted to change the story, and it was at the same time, but we didn't know it. We had to talk about it.
Well, what I was thinking, because I remember this time very clearly, like almost like it was yesterday. So we had our third baby. Then I started coaching when she was a year old. And then I did like deep inner coaching after she turned a year. Shortly after, we got pregnant with baby number 4. I think our third was 14 months old when we got pregnant with baby number 4. I said this before, and I'm going to say it again. I feel like with every birth of a child, I birthed a new part of me, and I birthed a new trauma. And it's like shedding old skin. I feel like that happened every time. So when I birthed our 4th baby, it was like even more shit came up that I didn't remember. Probably the worst of it came up. And I was on this, I was not nice about it. The way I showed up was not nice about it, but I was on a mission. I was on a mission to do shit, to be heard, to have a voice in this world. And at the time, my lovely husband wasn't moving on the same path as me. He was a little bit below me, and I remember him looking at me saying, wow, like you're growing really fast, really quickly, and I don't feel like I'm with you right now. And he kind of broke too, and I didn't know if he remembered this part, but it was after our fourth baby, I had the worst postpartum because, as I said, baby number 3 was the hardest baby. And we got pregnant very shortly after she turned a year old. So it was like back-to-back pregnancies for me. And I wasn't yet quite over the postpartum from baby number 3 and then got pregnant with baby number 4. So baby number 4 postpartum hit me very, very hard. But I was still doing the healing work and suffering at the same time. And I think Locke can speak for himself, but he had a little bit of I don't want to call it like a midlife crisis, but he had a little bit of a breakthrough.
Well, I mean, I would say it's more of a breakdown.
Yeah.
And if that's a midlife crisis, then my life's going to be pretty short because I was kind of young for that. I didn't buy a Corvette or anything stereotypical like that. So, yeah, I mean, I think that your perspective of where we were differs from mine a little bit in some ways, but I think we were both growing. I think you were struggling with what we talked about before in terms of pushing me away because of the trauma that you were digging back up, and I was struggling with that kind of dynamic change in our relationship. And my way of dealing with struggling is similar to yours, to lash out. And so lashing out at you, lashing out at the kids, just starting to get really frustrated. And so breakdown is the word that I used at the time and I would still use. Basically, the short version is I had a moment of raw truth with myself where I realized that I didn't, and for as far as I could remember back into my childhood, never had liked or even loved myself. And that was a difficult thing for me to admit to you. I remember exactly where we were in our house at the time when I told you that. And, I think that was obviously an important realization in general, but an important realization for our relationship. Like you talked about with your trauma, in order to do something about the problem, which was manifesting itself, that I wasn't aware of the problem, but it was obviously manifesting itself in our life. In order to do something differently, I had to acknowledge the problem.
Yeah.
And do something about it. So, I mean, we've both had ups and downs individually.
Yeah.
And we've both had breakthroughs and breakdowns, if you want to call them that. But we keep coming back and we keep realizing that we kind of like each other.
Yeah. Well, it was that December that you asked me to marry you again, which I didn't get down on my knee like you.
You redeemed yourself.
I did.
Yeah, so it was really interesting because there's this stereotype, the 7-year itch, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So interestingly enough, as cool, I think it's really cool. As cool as it is that we got married on the 1-year anniversary of the day that we met, almost down to the day, a lot of that timeline of that first year, almost down to the day, 7 years later, is when we kind of repeated a lot of the pattern.
Yeah.
Fell in love again, did a lot of things. So I said I had a breakdown. I kind of had my breakdown around, it was in September. It was right near the middle of September. And I actually went back looking at some of the dates. We ended up falling in love again with each other, like you said. Shortly after I had that breakdown and breakthrough, we did some things about our problems, and we ended up realizing, even though, we both had doubts in certain ways, not only that we still liked each other, but we actually fell back in love. And so I wanted to kind of, once I realized the pattern, the 7-year kind of first chapter of our life, I ended up proposing that December, proposing again, I guess. I don't know what to call it. Asking you to marry me again. 7 years on the same day as the day I proposed to you the first time, because I thought that would be really cool, to wrap it up kind of like that. But I think the important takeaway to this is, we fell in love over again because we put in the hard work, and we struggled through some hard times, realizing we're not perfect, realizing our flaws, doing a lot of deep inner work, and just kept coming back to the table over and over again.
Yeah.
Even though there were times where we didn't want to.
Yeah, for sure. It's easy to give up. I see either people give up way too easy or stay when they shouldn't. And for me, I can be very explosive, and then I flee. So it was relearning how to be imperfect and also communicate and say things to each other that maybe the other person doesn't want to hear, without getting defensive, because that was also a pattern for both of us. And so just being perfectly human, like perfectly not perfect and human.
Yeah. And realizing that about the other person.
Yeah. So that was basically the reason for this podcast was, it might have been long, but I think it's very important. And I think a lot of people can relate to the things that we were saying, even if they didn't have the same beginning, fairy tale love story. This podcast, I know a lot of other couples or married people could relate to.
Yeah. Yeah. I think everybody's had struggles. I think the key for us was realizing, slightly different for each of us, but the same realization. So for me, realizing that you weren't going to leave because of my flaws, and for you realizing that I was a safe place for you. Yeah. Despite your fear that maybe I wasn't there is no need to run away. And when we realized those two things, or for each of us, we were able to, I think that's when we realized, we're able to feel assured that the other person was fully committed. Yeah. It was hard for me to feel like you were committed when you were constantly threatening to leave, or actually trying to get out the door, actually going out the door and eventually coming back. But, that was your pattern. That was your defense mechanism. Yeah. But it was hard for me to feel like you were committed, and therefore hard for me to open up in a lot of ways. And the reverse of that is true. It was hard for you to feel like you were in a safe place, that it was safe and that you didn't have to flee, that you could be yourself. And once we had that, and I think it'll be different for each person and each other couple, but I think that's when we truly understood what commitment felt like from the other person. And we were able to see the other person's flaws without needing to attack them. Yeah. And we were able to hear the other person. You said, call each other out. We were able to give the other person constructive criticism. And sometimes, honestly, kind of rude criticism, too rude, not deserved, but the other person is able to hear through the rude. Yeah. To actually hear the point, because we know that the other person is fully committed. Yeah. And we're not saying that we got it all perfectly figured out now, because we don't. No. You're a handful. We still have moments. I still can go back to old patterns sometimes. Yep. I think we both can. I think the point is I realize it now, and it's not what it used to be. And I can realize
in the moment or right after it happens that it happened and apologize, because I couldn't always apologize too. I struggled with that.
Yeah.
So
yeah, we still have our flaws, but I think, and we can end on this note, every, the fairy tale love stories, every fairy tale love story, as soon as the Disney movie ends, there's a lot of shit that hits the fan, and there's a lot of hard work that needs to go in, or that relationship's not going to last.
Yeah.
And that same thing is true for things that, that aren't that stereotypical Disney movie fairy tale kind of love story. The same is true for every relationship. Hard work.
It's not all rainbows and unicorn farts. Is that what you say?
It's not all rainbows and unicorn farts. Sorry to burst your bubble.
No, it isn't.
All right. Now that we talked about rainbows and unicorn farts, I think we're good to end this episode.
I'm good.
Thank you guys for listening.
Yeah, thank you.
I hope you'll join us next time, and take care.
Hi, friends. If you're enjoying the show, would you please leave a quick rating or review on Apple Podcasts for us? Doing this helps more people find the podcast, which means even more people can benefit from the conversations. We really appreciate you and your time, and thanks, as always, for listening.